Okay, so welcome everyone. We're delighted to have you here. This is the Joint Academic Editing Book Club. The book club is co-organized by myself, Dr. Bailey Harrington, and the Editorial Freelancers Association co-chair, and Dr. Letitia Henville, the Editors Canada co-chair. We're running this event as part of the academic editing group, which is a joint effort by the EFA and Editors Canada. If you'd like to volunteer to help us with our work, either with the book club or with the larger chapter, please visit the EFA's academic editing chapter webpage. Letitia has put that link into the chat for you. Letitia, over to you.
Thanks, Bailey. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us for the first event of our second season of this book club. We are now in officially year 2 of the academic editing chapter. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Letitia Henville. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm joining you today from the Hackney region in East London in the UK. This part of the City of London was formerly an industrial area, and its current prosperity owes a substantial debt to the colonial legacy that carries on in the form of generational wealth. Where I'm working today is a 10-minute walk from a theater called the Hackney Empire, which attests to the sustained benefits of inherited and arbitrary privilege. I benefit from that privilege. Today, we're joined by Dr. Rachael Cayley, who has taught academic writing to graduate students in the Graduate Center for Academic Communication at the University of Toronto for the past 15 years. I first met Rachael in 2014 when I was one of the graduate students that she supported at U of T, and I can say with honesty that I don't think I would have finished my dissertation without Rachael. So thank you, Rachael, again for that. Rachael's book, Thriving as a Graduate Writer, came out this past June. Rachael, it is great to have you here. Welcome.
Thanks so much, Letitia, and hi, everyone. It's great to be here. As Letitia said, I'm Rachael Cayley. I'm a full-time faculty member at the Graduate Center for Academic Communication, which is part of the School of Graduate Studies at the University of Toronto. And for the last 15 years, I've been able to work in classrooms and in one-on-one appointments with graduate writers to help them with the various things that make grad school so difficult. As I went through that process, I realized that I was saying a lot of the same things. I was helping people with a lot of the same issues. And I decided at some point along the way to create a blog that would start to kind of encapsulate some of the advice that I was giving, be able to acknowledge the consistent issues that students were facing. And then a couple of years ago, I decided that maybe I'd like to put that approach into a more systematic form and into a book. So last June, I published a book called Thriving as a Graduate Writer, and Principles, Strategies, and Habits for Effective Academic Writing. And Letitia was generous enough to invite me to come and talk to you about it today, and I'm really looking forward to doing that.
Rachael, as you already know, I have drafted a few questions for us, and I'll start the conversation with those questions. But I totally invite anyone in the room today to either raise your hand on camera or use the raise hand feature to bring in your own question, or you can write it in the chat, and Rachael and I can integrate it into our conversation. So I wanted to start with my own question for you, Rachael. In the preface to your book, you describe yourself as a monolingual Canadian, a PhD in philosophy, a former editor, and a teacher of graduate writing. And I was wondering if you could start by telling us a little bit more about your career, and especially what made you transition from editing to teaching.
So as you just said, I have a PhD in philosophy, and I was fairly clear as I went along, got towards the end of that process that wasn't exactly the right thing for me for a range of reasons. And so when other circumstances brought me to Toronto, I decided that I would build on the editorial work that I'd done as a graduate student when I worked for a journal, and try to forge a path working in-house as an editor. So I worked at Oxford University Press in Toronto, which, as many of you know, is a smaller part of the OUP enterprise. The main monograph publishing happens out of UK and the US, but they had all these different branch offices, which were largely geared towards higher ed publishing, specifically for the market in which they were located. And so we did a lot of geography and history and sociology, the sorts of things that need a Canadian specific text. And I did that for a couple of years as a developmental editor, and I loved it. It's developmental editing, which I didn't know before I started doing it, gives you a wonderful opportunity to shape projects and to really work closely with authors to create things. It was in no way unhappy in that role, but as would be completely familiar to all of you, it didn't feel as secure as I wanted in a lot of ways. And I just happened through happenstance to see this job at U of T that drew on a range of things that I had done. So it really involved working closely with grad students, which I'd done a lot of as a grad student myself. And it had this new way of working with text that I think I didn't even know existed. So I'd really enjoyed working with text as an editor. I had never taught writing, but I saw a way, I had this vision of this role for myself where I could really help graduate students with the emotional and psychological burdens that I think are so pernicious and so much worse than they need to be, and to also be able to really focus on the nitty-gritty of text, which I really, really love. So that led me back to the university, and I've been lucky enough to be able to continue doing this role with those two components of working closely with graduate students and really getting to think a lot about what makes texts work and not work.
Can you say a bit more about grad student writers specifically? I mean, you touched on it there with the challenges that they encounter. Can you just tell us a bit more about what your experience is working with graduate writers?
Sure. I think that writing is so central to the graduate student experience. All the things are coming at you. You're learning all these new things, and you have to turn it around and present something. And with graduated levels of difficulty, you need to produce materials that other people can use, usually to evaluate you. Or for other forms of career advancement. And so there's a tremendous amount at stake, and almost nothing is said. And that's maybe that's an exaggeration at this point. More and more is said, but still far less than needs to be. And so I think graduate students are in this sort of paradoxical position where they're under tremendous pressure, increasingly, to publish during the time of their study, which wasn't even true, when I did my PhD. They're under this pressure to publish, to produce, to get grants, to do all those things that require strong writing skills, and nobody's really talking about writing. And they might get sent to a writing center, go and get some help, sort of, you should be taking care of this thing. But even that language really implies that writing is somehow sort of ancillary to graduate education, right? Graduate education is about research, it's about something, but not about writing. Writing is a set of skills that you are meant to pick up somehow along the way. And I think for most people, that kind of acquisition isn't realistic. It works for some people. Some people have a really good ear for text and language, and sort of have an instinct for emulating the genres that they encounter. But for a lot of people, that's very opaque. They're reading the things, but they don't know how to produce them themselves. And so I think that graduate students are left in this unfortunate and under-supported position. And I think that we can always hope that departments will do more, that departments will see that disciplinary writing ought to be part of graduate education in the same way that methods or something is. But I think that's a ways away. And the other side of that is that there's a skill to teaching writing. And it's unrealistic to imagine that disciplinary faculty will simply be able to have that ability just because even if they were to think it was sufficiently important. So we need them to message differently. We need them to talk about writing differently. But we do, I think, also need institutional writing support that is more centralized. And that is designed to create autonomy among graduate writers, among novice academic writers, so that they can learn these practices and understand that it's legitimate to need to know more about them, and also be given the concrete information that will help them to develop themselves as academic writers. And I'll just say lastly, like anything with graduate writing, it is generational. So as more of that happens, more of it will happen because more people will come out of grad school having had some writing support, and they will see that as natural. And that will, I think, trend towards in a better direction.
One of the things that you comment on there is the fact that a lot of this generation is hopefully getting writing support. I suppose that depends on their institution. But a lot of us in the room today are part of that system where some of the writing support that these students are getting, even if they're not getting it within the institution. And given that these graduate students are often in a vulnerable position, somebody's just mentioned UCLA in the chat. We know that many of our students are underpaid, and some of them are on strike because of that. So I'm wondering if we can get really deep really early and talk about ethics. Do you have any comments on what it means to ethically work with, engage with, support, teach, and also edit graduate students' work? Any thoughts there?
So I think, as you've just acknowledged, it is a really complicated issue. I think from within an institution, I have obviously I have the privilege of being able to support graduate students in quite a straightforward way, that being my actual responsibility, my actual job. I think that, of course, there are, as you're all really well aware, there's the sort of simple ethical component of the sort of intellectual property issues, making sure that everyone's signed off, making sure supervisors know that you're working with somebody outside the institution, and those things are all really important logistically. I think that I wanted, I always want to say to students when they come to me, when they've been told to hire somebody, which sometimes happens, right? People choose to, sometimes, like Letitia just alluded to in the chat, but sometimes people are told to. And so I feel like I have a dual role of saying, I don't think that's right. I don't think people should be told that they have to hire someone to finish their degree. But I also think there's nothing wrong with it. I think that, getting help with your writing is a wonderful thing. And professional editors are an amazing resource. So I think one of the reasons I am so uneasy with people being told is it's so often multilingual writers who are being told. Right. And so we've admitted people, we have welcomed them, ostensibly, we've taken a great deal of money from them. And then I don't want the message to be, but you need someone else to fix this. Right. I would love a world in which we took responsibility as an institution for the writing of the students who are in our programs. But since that isn't the world that we live in, I think it's really useful to help everybody, students, but everybody, really understand that the work of editing is so integrated isn't the right word. People imagine, and not you people, but other people imagine that you can work on writing, right? That writing is just something that exists and you can make some changes, you can fix the errors. But everyone in this room knows that the minute you try to fix almost even the smallest error, you have a question, right? You think, oh, just take this comma's wrong. Oh, but maybe it isn't wrong. Maybe it's wrong in this way, but maybe it's wrong in that way, right? And so if I remove it, that doesn't help anything. So I've got to ask the author a query about whether they meant to say this or this. So there's so much interesting back and forth that happens when you're working with authors. I think most graduate students don't get that kind of in-depth experience of working on their writing with someone else. It could happen if they're really committed to working with us at the Writing Center. It could happen if they have an extraordinary supervisor. But it's a really amazing experience to have somebody from outside your own frame come to your writing and help you understand what its strengths and weaknesses are.
Kathleen, did you want to jump in? Yeah.
Sure, yeah, thanks. Rachel, I love this book. It's amazing. It's so great to get to read a book and be like, yes, someone who gets it. I can share this. So I wanted to get your thoughts on graduate reading, supporting graduate readers. I feel like everything we're talking about with writing is this also happening with reading, that students are expected to just somehow pick this up or have come in with it. And I think that the kind of reading we do as researchers is different, and they really could use some instruction. I have a sense that you probably have thought about this too.
Yeah.
So let us know your thoughts, please.
Yeah, I mean, I think that in the interest of keeping this particular book compact, and we might get to that later, all the things I didn't put in it. One of the things I really left out was the pre-writing process, like all the things that happen prior to writing. And I'm a strong advocate of writing early and having writing be part of your pre-writing process. But there are still things that precede writing, and reading is one of them. It's not something that I have a lot of engagement with in the classroom. We do have other people in our unit who do more teaching of pre-writing and how to organize your thoughts. And it is something that graduate students, I think, and lots of you have been in this situation, have a natural evolution, right? They come in reading one way, they leave reading another way, right? Because we all need to overcome the idea that we can read scholarly material as though it were, a novel or something. We start at the beginning, we read it, we follow up all the threads that it lays out for us, and really give it our full attention. Like most people imagine early in grad school that that's your job, right? Is to be the world's best reader. And in fact, if you're the world's best reader in grad school, you're going to read a fraction of what you need to read, right? So you have to become this different kind of reader, this kind of reader that is sort of gleaning things rather than reading them. And I think that those are the kind of sort of the hidden curriculum kinds of things that departments could be way more active about explaining. And I think that we certainly at our writing center offer, consistently offer workshops on those sorts of topics. And some of it is just making people feel okay about that, right? Making people feel that it's actually okay to skim an article. That you just need to know what's basically in it. You need to understand what it cites. You need to understand where the sort of family resemblances are. You need to understand how things respond and what argues with what. And I think that helping people to broaden their understanding of what reading can do and what has to be accomplished through reading is a really important secondary thing that a graduate writing consultant has to be able to do. And the added bonus is, as you talk about reading, you're also able to talk about reading as a way of improving your writing, right? So you can also start saying, not only will you be a better reader if you know how to read through genre, you'll also be a better writer because those genres will start to be things that you really understand and know what work they do and can emulate them in ways that are meaningful.
I wanted to follow up on that, especially that last point about reading to become a better writer, because one of the things that you offer in the book is these little examples, template sentences, where you show us how the example sentences are working. It's totally the opposite of reading like a grad student. It's deeply, closely engaged with example sentences. The little template sentences that you provide help us to imagine alternate constructions for conveying the similar messages or same message. I was wondering if you could share with us your favorite template sentence from the book, or the ones that you see your students finding the most useful.
Yeah. I mean, this chapter was really, really difficult and really, really fun to write. I really wanted the book to have a sort of soup to nuts quality. Like, I really wanted it to be under 200 pages, and I wanted it to cover not everything, but plausibly everything. And so that meant sentences, right? That meant the actual mechanics of writing. Because it starts pretty highfalutin, right? It gives my big philosophy of, writing as a form of thinking and blah, blah. But I also wanted to be able to meet people where they are, which is often like, I don't actually know how to use semicolons. And, that's the thing that's bothering me. So I think that I started from the perspective that people waste a tremendous amount of time on grammar. Right? That because everyone in this room understands grammar really well, we save a lot of time for ourselves because we choose different sentence constructions, but we don't change them back. We don't worry all the time if we've used this thing right, or if you're allowed to say that, or is this a thing? Can you start a sentence with a preposition, or is that not allowed? Blah, 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 blah. All the things that you're worried about somehow. We don't have to worry about those same things. We have different things to worry about, obviously, but we don't have those things because we know the answers to a certain set of questions. And what I see in these rooms of graduate students where I am, where everybody's, probably basically a genius, they still don't know how to use a semicolon. Right? And they're not knowing is wasting their time. Right? So a lot of the spirit of the kind of mechanical parts of this book is have an answer for yourself. Right? Create a template or a vision or like a particular version of how you write certain things so you can go to that and you don't have to ask yourself, am I doing it right or wrong? And so I created 5 patterns that I tried to use for those. So it's really not grammar. I'm not teaching grammar. I'm not qualified to teach grammar. But I felt like I can show functionally these 5 things that we do. And so if I had to pick a favorite, it's hard, I love them all, but if I had to pick a favorite, it would probably be a really robust list. It would probably be the kind of list sentence that starts with a full sentence, right? The issue of blah, blah has been discussed in 3 significant ways. That kind of sentence, followed by a colon, followed by complex enough list items that they are best separated by semicolons. And I think every graduate student, I say this in all my classes, I think every graduate student needs to know how to write that sentence, needs to know how to use that colon to introduce the list, needs to know how to write an opening sentence that anticipates the list, right? Because reading long lists that haven't been anticipated for you by the writer is awful, right? So knowing that you have to provide that thing that's going to help people to then process the information you're going to provide, and then that you've sufficiently divided each one off, right? That you haven't used commas in such a way that they don't know when the list items end, right? So they've got these actual little things that they can understand. I think if everyone knows how to write that sentence, given how much listing we do, given how much complex information we try to synthesize in list form, but also in prose form in most disciplines, I think that if I had to pick a favorite, I think that's a kind of indispensable skill that graduate students should all have.
Becky, let's go to you. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry, was that me you were saying? Oh, okay. Hi, I had a question. First, I loved your book. Thank you so much, because I went through a lot of that as a graduate student writer. My question was about building an effective writing community, the dynamics of that. I've noticed with my students when I was teaching undergrads and with my children now, getting students to provide each other effective feedback was really difficult in peer reviews that were set up in class. They didn't want to offend each other, so they would just say, looks good. And also concerns of graduate students would be, how do I protect the integrity of my research from someone else? I'm trying to keep it private before I publish and that sort of thing. There's just so many dynamics packed into building a writing community. This may be a whole nother book that you can write next. But I was wondering if you could kind of help describe what it would look like to have an effective dynamic writing community for graduate students.
Yeah, it's a great question. I will say that I am currently working on an edited collection about sociality in writing. So looking at graduate writing groups broadly framed, and it's sort of a practitioner-based approach. So it's going to be a collection of 15 different chapters from 15 different programs around North America that have created writing programs for graduate students that really forefront sociality. So that's something that might be of interest later on. I think that I think one of the first things that I would say about graduate writing communities is that I think it's really helpful to have a continuum of them. It's really helpful to think, on the one hand, me and another person, we're going to sit together in a cafe side by side with our computers open so we can see each other's screens, and that's going to be our writing community. Right? I'm going to meet another person now that we're so good at it online for 2 hours at such and such a time in the week. We won't talk much. We'll just get some writing done. It'll be protected writing time, just because we're as humans, we're so much more likely to meet the obligations that we have to other people than we are to ourselves. And then you can put that kind of pure, sort of show up and write or accountability style community. And then way at the other end, there's something that involves actual text sharing. And I think it's really helpful to see text sharing as a kind of extreme form of writing community. Not a bad one in any way, but an inaccessible one for a whole lot of reasons, some of which you listed. So people are nervous about sharing their writing because they're worried about proprietary information. People are really unsure of their own expertise, and so giving writing feedback is something that they feel really unclear about. I think that when people who are unfamiliar with giving writing feedback try to give writing feedback, often they sort of end up in a kind of argumentative mode, right? Because they think that they need to criticize, which is often less helpful than actually providing the meaningful feedback. It's also intensely time consuming to provide writing feedback to other graduate writers while you are a graduate writer. I think people who do it learn a tremendous amount about writing. And so I think it's hugely valuable, but amongst the people that I work with, it's so rare for people to really seek out and want those kind of communities. Some supervisors at U of T create them, particularly at places like our education faculty, which are places that are more interested in process. So they'll create groups, and then you get that little bit of supervisory involvement, creates a little more of an obligation structure. It's really laborious, and there's a payoff to looking at other people's writing that I think is really hard to convince people of in advance, because it feels like, well, I don't have time to be doing this. I've got all of this to do. When you start looking at other people's writing, to put it in a really simplistic way, you will immediately be confused, right? So the minute you sit down with someone else's writing, you will encounter, before you've been at it very long, something that doesn't make sense. And for you to then be able to understand that the reason this didn't make sense is because the person who was writing it was sure that it did, right? It made sense to them. They thought everything was right there, right? I said it all. And because that's each one of us, anytime any one of us sits down to write, we leave out all the important stuff that other people will need to really understand what it is that we're saying. I can tell people that. I can talk about the curse of knowledge and the way that we're, unable to say the most important things because we assume that those are obvious, the way we hate to repeat ourselves, the way our own familiarity with our texts gets worse over time. And so we get even worse at explaining things. It's like, I can tell people all that, but nothing really hits that message more like spending time with all the other people's writing, and then you can start to see, okay, well, everybody must do this. Seeing people's first drafts, when in the past you've only ever seen your own, is revolutionary, right? Because most people have worked from the assumption that they write uniquely bad first drafts because they compare their own sort of, their own beginning halting efforts with the more polished prose that they encounter in the world, some of which is written by professors, much of which has been edited professionally, certainly is coming out of more secure professional identities. So, a lot of graduate writers are making terrible evaluations of their own writing based on poor information. So spending time on other people's writing can be good. But to get back to your question, I think that for a lot of people in a lot of disciplines, it's fairly unlikely that they will do it, which is why I think it's so important to be able to talk about other forms of writing community, really valuable writing alongside other people. Writing is this preeminent shared activity of graduate students, and it needs to be so much less hidden than it is. So I'm willing to stop short of those more complicated text sharing arrangements, as wonderful as I think they are, if it means that people are still having writing groups. They are still writing with other people. They are talking and thematizing about the writing experience in ways that deepen their own self-compassion and their own writing competence.
Thank you.
Cheryl, did you want to?
Sure. Yes, hi. I typed in a comment and I would like to know your thoughts about it. I left the university recently to focus solely on editing and writing consulting. I've been doing that on the side for several years while I was teaching, but I'm, for many reasons, going forward with it. Having taught a lot of undergrad students, especially on the first 2 years, and having formerly worked in a public school system, I kind of see the grad writing issue as part of a larger issue in terms of how our culture, let's say Western culture, North American culture, I know you're in Canada, and it may be different in Canada, but I don't believe that writing instruction is truly emphasized. I'm going to say the span of K-12, obviously, I mean beyond elementary, but I don't think, especially in the age of technology that we are, I don't think that that kind of writing is really taught, because I have seen when the new undergrads come, they don't know the basics, and hopefully they do pick up stuff along the way, or if they know the basics, they only know the basics. So are we expecting too much of grad students, or does it depend on the institution? Just some thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that I don't have a lot of insight into what undergraduate writing is like in an historical context, like how it has changed in particular. I think that because I don't work with undergraduates ever, I don't have real personal insight into the notion that there's been a overall decrease in writing skill over the years. But I know that a lot of graduate students are making it into grad school without having been asked to think about themselves in any way as writers. And so that really varies across the disciplines. It certainly varies across countries. Canada, I don't think it's better or worse, but it does have a different system of undergraduate writing instruction. And I think that my solution to this, and it's not really a solution, but is to want to make graduate students feel like learning how to write is a natural activity. It's not a deficiency. Graduate students are not deficient when they arrive, is the message that I want to give. Now, in some cases, I'm sure there are local deficiencies that different people have, absolutely. But I want the overall message to be that when you arrive in graduate school and you don't know how to write, quote unquote, that's exactly where you're meant to be, right? That is the idea behind graduate education, is that it's going to teach you a range of academic practices. It's going to teach you how to do research in your field. It's going to teach you sort of fundamental epistemological assumptions, methodological assumptions. It's also going to need to teach you how to communicate. And as I said earlier, that isn't always a big part of how graduate departments see themselves. But that's my mission, is to try to make graduate students feel like just like it's legitimate for them to learn the things that they didn't know about their discipline when they arrived. It's also legitimate for them to learn how to write. And so while there may, as you say, be a sort of decrease in skill, I'm more likely to see it as an alteration of skill rather than a decrease, right? I think we are, we, in some sense, our kids are extremely literate in all sorts of ways, but they certainly have a different literacy than somebody of my age had before the internet, before texting, before all those things. My literacy was different than my kids is, but my kids also have they write constantly. They communicate constantly with language in a way that we didn't, because we didn't have any means to, right? So I think there are absolutely sort of historical specific literacy markers, and anyone who's teaching writing or working with text needs to be aware of those. And I think, but my overall message is really is to make graduate students feel that what they don't know yet is fine, and that their extraordinary capacity for learning things means that they can also learn this crucial skill.
Thank you.
Sarah, did you want to jump in?
Sure. Yeah, I also had the great privilege of getting to work with Rachael at U of T. I met with you and I went to a couple of your workshops, and then went on to work at writing centers and teach writing, and then shifted to editing in the last few years. So the book is amazing. I have a ton of questions and thoughts, but I kind of wanted to go back to where we started and to talk a little bit more about working with graduate students as editors, because I feel like most of us, that's probably what our most direct kind of entry point is. I've only worked with a couple of graduate student writers, and I feel like both of those cases have been very strange and exceptional. So I don't know that, I don't think that it will ever be a big part of my work, maybe. But I wanted to know like what you think in terms of I think probably all of us have worn these hats of being editors and teachers of writing in some way. And there's definitely a big tension for me when I've been working with these few graduate student writers of like, what hat am I wearing in terms of like, how much am I editing and how much am I trying to teach you? Because to go back to Letitia's question about like ethics, like the teaching part feels more ethical than the editing part for some reason, right? Like you make that great point in the book about the distinction between editing and revision, is like editing is something you do to other people. And so it's like, I feel like when I'm working with graduate students, that like, it feels kind of icky to be like, I'm doing this to you, in a way that I feel totally at liberty to do that with a faculty member's work. So I guess, yeah, like where do you think an editor, if they end up working with a graduate student, like what should their goal be in terms of like, is it to help the writer? Is it to help the text? But then also you can't spend all your time teaching them everything, because then it would take you forever, and you have to run a business. So that's like my big quandary, I think, with graduate students.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we certainly say at the, in a writing center context, which I'm sure some of you work or have worked, we say like, we're here to improve you as a writer. We're not here to improve this bit of text, right? So this little bit of text, like whatever it was, that you showed me when you took that class all those years ago, I looked at that piece of writing and maybe it got a little better because we gave so much attention to it, but I was really thinking about what I could glean from that about what you did as a writer, right? So I wanted you to leave the appointment with a better understanding of what kind of writer you were so that you could have more autonomy and produce other texts that were, that didn't have whatever issues that there might be within the one that you showed me. But I think that you point to a really important issue, because that is what people need, right? People need to be taught how to write. When you're already in a situation, though, where your responsibility, your ethical responsibility, your financial arrangement with the person is that you are going to work on their text. I think as long as you've gotten the appropriate, sign-offs, right, to make sure that the supervisor knows that this relationship exists. I think I wouldn't ever work on graduate student writing if I didn't have those signatures in place, because you don't want the student to end up in a difficult situation later. They should be taking care of that themselves, but I think as an editor, you could go that extra mile and make sure that they've protected themselves in that way. And then I would want to have a conversation about how difficult it is to work on text without changing it, to make suggestions that don't then create whole new ways of thinking about the material, right? So I don't know of anything that's, there's so few changes, and you all know this, that you can make to text that doesn't need a conversation, that doesn't start to make things different than perhaps the writer intended. And so I think that, something that people often do in writing centers is to say, I'm going to look really closely at this, at this part of the text. I'm going to use this part of the text for this purpose. I'm not going to do that stuff anymore throughout, right? So I'm not going to change. I'm not going to look at the comma. This is a writing center appointment now. I'm not going to look at the commas throughout, but I might give you a couple pages of like really hardcore feedback on what you're doing. I think it might be somewhat possible to create the inverse of that, which is to create a small part of your feedback that was really designed to be pedagogical, right? Like where you're really saying, this is why this is wrong, this is why this isn't working, this is a tendency you have, and then say, in the interest of our financial arrangement, I'm now going to go through and correct a lot of those things. But great. I want you to know about them. Maybe that might help.
Yeah, that's a great, and I did that as a writing professor and writing center tutor and consultant, but I don't think I've thought of doing that as an editor.
That's why I write the advice column that I write. So I can be like, here's a problem that you have linked, and then I don't have to teach it again. But Jenna, you have your hand raised. Did you want to jump in?
Hi, yes. Rachel, this is not a question, more of a thank you. I had a Zoom meeting with an author this week, and I had just at that point read the part of your book about revisioning, and I told her about that, and she was having just finished a first draft and then feeling, I think, fairly daunted by the task ahead at crafting the second draft. And looking at the introduction, the book had changed significantly from what she had originally planned, and I was able to use your book and tell her that is how it is supposed to be. I would be worried if it didn't go that way, so I just wanted to say thank you. This idea of even the word itself encapsulating what it means to see again, to see in a new way, the whole thing. So thanks.
I'm so glad. That's great to hear. I mean, if I could do one thing, it would be to help graduate writers understand that what they think of as inefficiency is really what writing is like. You know, there's so many people will say to me, yeah, like if I tell them that their writing is good in an appointment, they're like, oh yeah, but you know how long it took me? And I would love that not to feel like, and that's not a mark against you, right? That is the mark of a good writer, really. And that's a tough thing. We don't always see that in all the various skills we have in life, right? We're aiming in most instances to be able to do things more quickly, more efficiently. And writing is so amazingly resistant to all efficiency measures. You can make your workflow more productive. You can, you know, there's all sorts of things. You can organize your thoughts better. You can have better sort of matrices of the literature. You can do all that stuff. But writing is amazingly slow, and it, you know, we don't live in a world that values slow that much. And so I think it's really easy for people either to feel bad about their writing product or to feel bad about their writing process. And so I would love people to feel at the very least as though their process difficulties are actually just the process. And it's something that they need to embrace and learn from.
One of the things that I think is so interesting and different about your book from how I usually think about academic writing generally is the way that your book does, as you've just described, bring together process and product. As an editor, I usually only focus on the product, the written thing, the text. But you tend, I think it's fair to say, and correct me if I'm wrong, to bring together the process and the product in your conversation. And I'm wondering if you just wanted to say a little bit more about writing the verb, writing the noun, and why it was important for you in your book to talk about process and output.
Yeah, I think it was in for me kind of an evolution, because as I said at the very outset, I really came to this out of an interest in text, right? I was really interested in how people construct and put words together and what makes good sentences and bad sentences, and why, you know, how to get people to write more paragraphing, you know, do paragraphing better and all that. And I realized over time that all that information was useful, but that I was talking to a lot of people, and that I had in fact been the kind of person who didn't struggle with writing necessarily in the sense of putting sentences and words together. I struggled with writing in the sense of I just didn't do it, right? Like I was one of those people who didn't write my dissertation in a timely manner because I was terrified of putting myself out there. I was terrified of getting everything out into the world. And I think that the reason that I have increasingly put more emphasis on process rather than product, Letitia, is just that I think for a lot of graduate students, their writing difficulties, their failure to meet deadlines, to put it really simply, is kind of crushing. Because it's often the first time that that's happened for people. It certainly was the first time it had ever happened for me. Like my self-conception was as though I was a person that did what I said I was going to do. I met everything. I never was late with anything until my first dissertation chapter. I think we need to have more conversations about how debilitating it is, in addition to everything else that's going on, to have to suddenly have to reevaluate your sense of yourself, because now on top of everything else, you're flaky, right? When you've never been flaky before. And so it really started to seem to me like I needed to be talking to the writers that I was working with about the deeper questions around productivity, right? Because so much of productivity discourse is super, you know, business schooly, right? You just, you know, get up earlier, try harder, or whatever. But it doesn't root itself in a real understanding of the sort of work that is happening, the identity work that is happening, the deep intellectual work that is happening. And so I think that I needed to supplement what I was doing about, you know, text and composition with a really, what I hoped was a more both compassionate and also more sort of acute sense of why we don't write, when writing is the only thing we need to do, when writing is the single most important thing, the thing that will give us the most professional advancement, satisfaction, the thing that will get us out of this program if we don't want to be in it anymore, this thing that will get us a job out of this program if that's what we want. Like, everyone knows that writing is decisive. And so all the not writing that people are doing is taking a real toll. And so that's why, to me, with my population, it's different, obviously, if you're working with people in an editorial relationship, but the way that the kinds of writers that I'm working with, it seems to me now to be really, really important that I am supplementing that the emphasis on text with an emphasis on why might you not be writing, and what do you need to know about writing that will allow you to make consistent commitment to your own writing part of what you do.
Rachel, can I jump in with a follow-up question? I think these issues that you're raising and that everybody has raised here are so crucially important, about not writing, about shame, about the importance of accepting the inefficiency of the process of writing sometimes. And I wonder what your thoughts are about how to convey this to the bureaucracy, shall we say, of the university, the people who make decisions about timelines, about tenure timelines, graduate student timelines, deadlines for classes, giving students extensions on papers or on their dissertation. How do we use the insights that you are articulating to have an impact on the culture of the university and the policies?
Yeah, that's a great question. I wish I had more of an answer for you. I certainly haven't had a tremendous amount of success in that regard. I've actually just taken an administrative position, and I'm hoping to be able to bring some of these issues of writing and the psychological strain of doing it as a significant part of graduate students meeting their milestones. I think obviously we live in a world with a much a greatly oversimplified view of productivity in general, and writing productivity in particular, right? So people just need to get down to it, I think, is often the kind of message that the administration when I encounter them have. And so I don't know, but the quick answer to your question, I don't know. I don't know how to, I don't really even know how to get in those rooms. I guess that would be the first thing, right? Like, we need writing people to be in meetings, talking. I think that I will say one thing, and this seems like kind of a long-term strategy, but I think more faculty writing support is something I've come to see as really significant for graduate student writing. So it's significant for them, of course. Faculty would love, value and would benefit from having more writing support. But I think that if we create a culture of writing on campus that allows our own faculty to express their vulnerability where writing is concerned and get support, I think my hope is that this will have a sort of trickle down, is a terrible expression, but that it'll have some kind of ripple effect, because it's been my experience that faculty who are willing to talk about their own writing struggles are much better able to support graduate students through theirs.
Thank you. That's really helpful.
So I think I'm gonna have to kind of start wrapping us up here, time-wise. So I mean, like, Rachel, if you've got anything you want to say, like, to close.
Just how much I've enjoyed talking to all of you, and I hope I got to all the questions. But feel free you know how to reach me. Feel free to reach out if you have questions.
You absolutely did not get to all the questions. There are so many questions we could have asked. For those of you who are in the room today, not everybody is able to read the book or finish the book before the meeting. And so I think you'll see in the chat, or you'll have heard from the questions, just how great this book is and how useful a resource it is for us as editors. So if you haven't read it yet, yeah. Anyway, over to you, Bailey.
Yeah.
Thanks, Letitia.
So on behalf of the EFA and Editors Canada, Rachel, my sincere thanks for this. It was a great discussion. You probably have not seen, but there's also been like a lot of ancillary discussion in the chat about like some other related books, and so like this has been, I think, very useful for everyone here. So book club admin stuff. Our next meeting will be in November. We will be discussing Written, Unwritten, Diversity and the Hidden Truths of Tenure by Patricia Matthews. We do ask that people like try to RSVP in advance, so we can send the Zoom URL and discussion questions if there's a discussion, like if it's not an author event in advance of the meeting. The date of the November book club is maybe changing, I think. So
Info will be available in your email inboxes as soon as we have it.
yes, it will go out in newsletters and things. But if you want to go ahead and get the book, Letitia is going to put the link, or has put the link for the book into the chat. So we have 2 more events that are coming up in September, chapter events. The first is a coffee chat on September 12th, where we'll be discussing working with students. So if you want to continue some of the conversation from today. And then our next Let's Talk About event will be on the 21st of September. This is an event with Kasha Patel, who is a comedian that is going to talk to us about the role comedy can play in scientific communication. So Letitia is going to paste those links into the chat as well. And then we do always suggest that you sign up for the academic editing chapter listserv. We don't send very many emails out on it, so you won't get spammed. It is mostly the newsletter, and then any like announcements for the things that are organized on like shorter notice. But the newsletter contains information about events, and we also feature different organizations that you might be interested in joining as an academic editor, or books that are relevant. There's a lot of good stuff in there. Yes. Yeah, so the best way to learn about like everything that we do, opportunities to be involved in the chapter, etc. The book club really is just one small part of everything that we do. That's everything that I have. Letitia, anything? Anybody?
Thanks everyone for being here. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.